Good evening. In a short period of time, 6 million Christians in America joined together to support the Jewish people. And as I was looking and listening, an idea occurred to me. A moment in history, 1936. In 1936, a wonderful thing was happening in Berlin. The Olympics. The whole world was invited, except for the Jews who were not allowed to participate. If there would have been 6 million Christians in America joined together in 1936 and stood in front of the building where the Olympic Committee, the American Olympic Committee was meeting, and tell them, don't participate. If the Congress of the United States would have been told and said, don't participate. If the British people would have said, don't participate, and joined the 6 million other Americans, I dare say, what follows wouldn't have happened. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Everybody participated, of course, but not Jews. It was a test case. Will the world tolerate? Will the world object? What will they do? If those 6 million people would have existed then, 6 million Americans, mind you, at the time would have amounted to 5% of the population of the United States then. What followed, I don't believe would have happened. But it was nobody cared, and therefore it continued. By 1938, the government of Germany decided two things. One is expansion, and the other one, Kristallnacht. What was that all about? On the night of November 9th to 10th, 1,200 synagogues were set on fire in Germany. Thousands of Jewish stores were looted at the order of the government, by ordinary people, you would think. I was all of 9 years old then. By 1939, because no one cared, part of Czechoslovakia was taken away, and by 1939 spring, there was no country called Czechoslovakia where I lived. And suddenly the country that I lived in, called now Slovakia, became a fascist country at the desire and vote of the people of Slovakia. And therefore, I could not go into the park because I was a Jew. I could not go to the beach because I was a Jew. Because nobody cared. An expansion took place. By 1939, September 1, World War II begins. Germany said, I want a piece of Poland. And they took it. And World War II begins. But the persecution of the Jews continues unabashed. By 1940, I, Irving Roth, going to a public school with kids I've known for years because we were in school together in the small city of 7,000 people. I was thrown out of school because I was a Jew. And nobody cared. There were no 6 million members of Kufai. And the world continues, and the war continues. Germany Italy, Hungary, Bulgaria are expanding, and simultaneously, so does the persecution of Jews. By 1941, all of Europe, except for the Soviet Union, is the hand of Nazis. And persecution of the Jews, the persecution of Irving Roth, continues. By 1941, in the country called Slovakia, my father had a business, a lumber business. Tens of thousands of railroad ties were produced by Roth and Company, shipped all over Europe, but he no longer was allowed to own it. So my father asked one of his Christian friends to lend his name so he can change the name of the company, and therefore no one can take it away. Well, he did. But within a matter of a few months, he told my father he likes the way my father is running his business, and he can stay as a manager. But he is the owner. Ordinary people were transformed. Nobody cared. By 1941 June, Hungary, Slovakia, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. And you would think there too, they would persecute the Jews, but they didn't do that. What they did from the very start is murder Jews. They organized units whose job it was not to fight the war because they were too old. Also, they got thousands upon thousands of volunteers whose job it was to go into towns and villages and cities in the Soviet Union, gather the Jews together, march them out into the forest and into the field, and murder them. Men, women, and children. Whether you were 2 days old, whether you're 100 years old, you were a Jew, you were murdered. And nobody cared. Simultaneously, just to make sure that you understand what that means, that same year, in August of 1941, the murder of Jews were known every single day in Washington and London. They knew exactly how many Jews were murdered, what day and where. Because the British broke the code, the communications code. If you haven't seen the movie Imitation Game, go and see it. You get the picture. Washington and London and Moscow knows. And nobody cares. And so the murder continues, but it's too slow. And by 1942, they decide that we need to get rid of all the Jews in Europe, all 11 million of them. And they need a faster system. And they do. They convene the brain trust of Germany for a conference on the 20th of January of 1942. The item on the agenda is a singular one. How are we going to get rid of every single Jew in Europe? At lowest cost, at faster rate. And my friends, this brain trust consisting of, well, 1/3 of the group sitting at that conference had PhDs. And so they were able to configure a brilliant system. We'll build death camps. Bring all the Jews into death camps. We'll murder them by gas, cheap, easy, takes very little manpower. We'll burn their bodies, and all that's going to be left of the Jews of Europe will be ashes. And nobody cared, my friends. It's 1944, the spring. Most of the Jews of Europe are dead, except for one small group, hungry And that's where I am. With my brother, with my grandparents. My parents are also in Hungary, but they're not in the same place. They're in Budapest because my father needs a job. Begins the possibility of murdering the last fragment of the Jewish people of Europe. The Jewish community, the leadership begs the Allies, bomb the rails to the death camps, to Auschwitz and Treblinka and Majdanek. Slow down the process. Bomb the bridges. The skies are open. Germany no longer can fight back. They're bombing day and night to Germany and any place that they want, but not the rails to Auschwitz. They know fully what is going on. They didn't care. And that, my friends, is part of the crime. And so that's where I am. I'm in a cattle car with my brother and my grandparents, 100 people inside this box. Train begins to move. 3 days go by and suddenly the train stops. It's nighttime. I get off the train. I jump off the train, having been cooped up there for 3 days and 3 nights with no bathrooms, no running water, no windows, no place to sit. I jump off the train, and what greets me are guards screaming, yelling, "Arouse! Get out quickly. Take nothing with you. Form lines." In the distance, flames coming out of chimneys. Of the 4,000 people that arrived that night with me in this place, in this death camp called Auschwitz, 3,700 were murdered by gas. My grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt. 3,700 were murdered. A small remnant, 300 of us, were separated, tattooed, to let us know clearly that we are not people with names. We're the property of the German government to do as they please. And so I, 14 years old, I'm sent to work, plow the fields, and drain the swamps. Day after day, on a diet of some black liquid, normally referred to as coffee. But anything that you get at Starbucks and that has absolutely no relationship. That was my breakfast. At lunch, some soup. At night, about 2 inches of bread. 350, at most 400 calories a day. On a diet like that, it was scientifically calculated by the dietitians of the Third Reich, you can last 6 to 8 months. But my friends, if you still lasted beyond that, they wanted to make sure that you don't waste their food if you can't work hard anymore. And so they had selections. Let me describe to you a selection. I work all day long. I'm 15 years old by now. In the swamp, draining it, coming back at night. And rather than going into my barracks, get washed up a little bit, get some bread, eat some of it, and save some of it for the next day maybe, we marched directly to take a shower. To take a shower, you get undressed. And from there, you simply go maybe 20 feet or so into the place where there are lots of shower heads. But sometimes there'd be a doctor look at you naked and determine if you should continue to live. Imagine being 15 years old, knowing that if the man in uniform, this doctor, realizes or decides that I'm too skinny, I'm dead. By next morning, I'm gassed and my body hurt. That's what I lived through. I was fortunate, and my brother was fortunate. We survived that. Hard work, no food. The Russian army is 50 miles away. Any moment, maybe they'll break through. Unfortunately, on the 18th of January of 1945, 60,000 people still living. Of the 1.2 million that came to Auschwitz, 60,000 are still alive. Marched out on a death march. You could hardly walk. You could hardly march 100 feet and not see a body on the side of the road. I wind up finally in another camp called Buchenwald. There, even less food. There, starvation. One day my brother is taken away. And here I am, 15 years old. Because I only get maybe a boiled potato every second or third day, I'm down to 75, 80 pounds. One morning, there's a death march again. I keep hiding. On the 10th of April, a guard comes along with a dog, finds me, marches me out, and I'm standing in front of the gate of Buchenwald at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the guards begin to gather to march us out on a death march. On that moment, my friends, suddenly a miracle. The miracle is that the siren goes off and American airplanes are about 5 kilometers away. They're bombing the city of Weimar all day long. The guards don't want to get killed, and I survive another day. The next morning, my friends, suddenly things are quieter. We hear large weapons overhead, and then quiet. And 2 American soldiers walk into my barracks. You may not know what the Messiah looks like, my friends. I do. One was black and one was white. So next time you want to know what the Messiah looks like, there are 2 of them. 2 healthy, strong, self-assured American soldiers, maybe 20 years old, look upon the skeletons of 250 kids shuffling along. They couldn't believe it. They broke down. Very soon they started feeding us, not knowing what to do. After all, they're skinny kids. What do? You feed them as much as you can. It was split peas and pork, the most delicious thing you have ever eaten. At least I have eaten. We pigged out. Fortunately, the next day, doctors come in, American doctors, and begin to feed us and try to rehabilitate us, which they do. And after a while, we get new clothing, the kids, that is. And not only that, we've been sleeping in these barracks, and what you had there is those, you can't kind of think of them as shelves, you know, along the floor, about 3 inches above the floor, some boards. 1.5 feet, 2 feet above that, another set of boards, and another set, and a 4th set. No mattresses, no covers. And so the American commander decides that we need to move out of there. They take us out and put us into a beautiful building, 4 kids to a room, and we get fed every day. And we get some chocolate bars. And one day, in addition to that, we get each one of us gets a carton of Camel cigarettes. My introduction to smoking. After the second cigarette, I thought I'm going to die. My mouth is burning. My lips are bad shape. I am shaking. I didn't die. Never smoked again. I traded my cigarettes for chocolate. I'm alone I'm alive, the war is over. What do? I have to go someplace. Is anyone alive in my family? And finally, I come back to the village from where I was taken and hoping that someone, a cousin, an uncle, my parents maybe are alive. First person I see, I ask him, anybody in the Roth family survived? He says, yeah, this farmer chugging along. I say, where? He points to a house. I run inside, open up the door, and there's my mother. I say, hi, Mom. You would imagine a 15-year-old, cool, right? And my mother fainted. She couldn't catch her breath. My parents survived. They survived because someone was willing to help. Someone cared. Turns out my father, as the Jews are being slowly moved to the trains on a death march, shot on the street and dumped into the river, the Danube, my father goes into a coma. He winds up in a hospital, in a Christian hospital. The doctors tell my mother he's going to die. A night nurse, a Seventh-day Adventist Christian woman, decides that she is going to try and save this man. And not only save him, maybe bring him back. And every night, she ministers to him. She talks to him. She pinches him. And nothing. A week goes by. 2 weeks go by. And one night, she's talking to him, moving him around. And suddenly, she hears him softly say, how long have I been asleep? My father comes out of a coma. He's fine. But my friends, he needs a place to hide. Why? Because the Jews of Budapest are being shot on the street, dumped into the river. This Christian angel lives in a one-bedroom apartment with her daughter, who is married, has a child with a granddaughter, and of course has a husband who is fighting the Russians on the Russian front. So he's not at home. He is in the Hungarian Nazi army. That's where he is. She says, I'll leave the door open, sneak in. We'll fix up a hiding place. My parents get there. They're hiding. Police come and look for them, and they don't find them. And one night there's a knock on the door. Into the hiding place they go. It is the husband. The Hungarian Nazi soldier comes home for 3 days. And so the wife explains to her husband about these very, very distant relatives who live with us. Actually, they're hiding here. And you mustn't tell anybody, because if you do, they'll be shot. Somebody will find out. And if you want to go to bed with me tonight, you're going to keep your big mouth shut. And so, my friends, my parents survived because someone cared. There are 25,000 trees planted in Jerusalem for every Christian or a group of Christians that save Jews. But the 500 million others stood by and did nothing. And so the Jews now are free. But they can't go back because they're going to be shot. Because after all, other people live in their homes. Other people have taken away their businesses. They don't want them there. And the Jews are sitting in the displaced person camp in Germany and some in Italy. And no place to go. Finally, in 1947, the UN decides for the first time in 2,000 years for the Jews to return to the Middle East, to the home where they started from almost 2,000 years ago and were taken out as slaves by the Romans. Back to Judea they go. But the world, the Arab world in particular, does not like that. And what do they want to do? Destroy them. The day Israel declares itself a state, the war begins. And then 1956, and 1967, and 1973, and 1980, and terrorism. And today, my friends, what is happening today? the people in Gaza have elected a government which is a terrorist group, and their objective is not to build, to murder. And the world stands by and does nothing, except for the 6 million people here in the United States who are saying, this is wrong, this is evil, these people have made up lies. So we must do something. Now you want to know why I think Kufa is critical? Because they're the one, the group, who unanimously understands persecution of the Jews, who's committed itself to saying, this must not happen again. My friends, there are even members of Congress of the United States who are using hate speech to destroy the Jewish people again. Congress of the United States, my friends. Professors at universities. And so, the job that Kufa has undertaken, no one has ever done it in 2,000 years. 6 million today. And as Pastor Heggie said, when 1 million was reached, all we have to do is get the other 49 million Christians, evangelical Christians, to join us. And so I beg you, join. Thank you very much.